It was a tribute to my father at 56 Hope Road, the Bob Marley Museum. And I was trying to get through the gate. And one of the security guys saw me trying to come through and started to clear the way for me. And he was like, make space, Gang Jr. coming.
Draw Kaimani's New Heights, Stephen's rendition of Don't Rock My Boat, or Damian's own catalog including Medication and Me Name Junior Gong. The tours serve as a reminder that whatever distinct musical identities the brothers had built individually, the five of them could still occupy a stage together as a genuine unit, sharing the spotlight rather than competing for it. What makes Damian Marley's story compelling isn't simply that he's Bob Marley's son. Plenty of children of famous musicians never managed to escape that framing entirely. Instead, he took an inheritance he never asked for, shaped by a father he barely got to know, and built something genuinely his own out of it. A sound that pulls from dancehall's rawness, hip-hop structure, and reggae's conscience all at once, refusing easy categorization at every turn. From a teenage DJ experimenting with a sound nobody expected from a Marley, to a 3-time Grammy winner collaborating with everyone from Nas to Mick Jagger to Skrillex, Damian Marley has spent nearly 3 decades proving that a legacy isn't something you simply inherit. It's something you have to keep building, one album, one collaboration, one unexpected creative risk at a time. And more than 4 decades after his father's death, with the Marley name still resonating across generations and genres, Damian remains one of the clearest examples of how that ongoing work looks in practice. For 30 years, the world believed it knew everything worth knowing about the Kingsale family. Marcus Kingsale had been reggae's reluctant prophet, a man who turned poverty and prayer into music that outlived him by decades. When he died at 34, he left behind a sound that still echoed through every corner of the world he'd never gotten to see, and 8 children scattered across 3 different mothers, all of them carrying a surname that was less a name than an inheritance of expectation. Of those 8, none carried it quite like Andre Kingsale. Andre was 7 when his father died, old enough to remember the smell of him, sandalwood oil and cigarette smoke, but too young to remember much else. He grew up in Portmore, raised by his mother Yolanda Bramwell, a jewelry designer who had briefly been famous in her own right for a necklace she'd made that a foreign pop star wore on a magazine cover. Yolanda remarried when Andre was 9 to a shipping executive named Desmond Ferris, a quiet, meticulous man who wore pressed linen shirts and never once raised his voice in Andre's presence. It was, by every outward measure, a comfortable childhood. It was also, Andre would later say in interviews, a slightly absurd one. The son of reggae's most famous revolutionary growing up in a gated community, driven to school in an air-conditioned car, while his father's old songs about burning down Babylon played on the radio in the very neighborhoods Andre never had to set foot in. He didn't resent it. If anything, it sharpened something in him. By 16, Andre had taught himself to write verses in his bedroom, borrowing his stepfather's old cassette deck to record over instrumental tracks he found on pirated CDs. His mother wanted him to study engineering. His stepfather, to his credit, bought him his first real microphone. By 19, Andre had a record deal. By 25, he had 3 albums, 2 of which had gone gold, and a growing reputation as the most unpredictable of Marcus Kingsale's musical children, the one who refused to simply repeat his father's sound, choosing instead to drag reggae through hip-hop and electronic music until it became something entirely his own. By 30, he had become, by several measures, more commercially successful in the United States than his father had ever been while alive. That fact alone made him a curiosity to journalists. It made him something else entirely to his family. The trouble, if it could even be called that at first, began with a documentary. A streaming network had commissioned a definitive film about Marcus Kingsale's life, timed to what would have been his 75th birthday. The project was overseen by Andre's eldest half-brother, Rashid, who had spent the better part of 2 decades positioning himself as the family's unofficial archivist and gatekeeper. Rashid had inherited his father's old master recordings, his handwritten notebooks, and, perhaps more importantly, his father's old business manager, a sharp-eyed woman named Delphine Ansa, who had quietly run the Kingsale estate's finances since before Marcus's death. Andre wasn't consulted on the documentary's script. He wasn't asked to contribute old photographs or interviews or even a single quote. When the trailer dropped, showing 5 of Marcus's children speaking warmly on camera about their father's legacy, Andre was conspicuously absent. Fans noticed immediately. Entertainment blogs ran headlines asking whether the Kingsale siblings were feuding. Rashid, when asked about it in an interview, brushed the question aside with practiced ease, saying only that Andre had other commitments and that the family remained close, joking that reporters love inventing drama where there was none. Andre said nothing publicly. He kept touring. He kept releasing music. But those close to him, his longtime engineer, a few of his backing musicians, noticed something had shifted. He'd grown quieter about his family in interviews, where he'd once been generous and expansive about his father's memory. Now he'd deflect, change the subject, let his publicist step in. It would be another 8 months before anyone understood why. The story, as it eventually came out, began with a woman almost no one outside the family had ever heard of. Marcus Kingsale's aunt, a retired schoolteacher named Constance Ate, who had helped raise several of the Kingsale children in the years immediately following Marcus's death, when the family's finances were in chaos and half the children were scattered among relatives. Constance was in her 80s now, living alone in a small house outside Mandeville, and she had spanned hope inside that darkness. At the 2006 Grammy Awards, Damian did something no Jamaican reggae artist had ever done. He won 2 Grammys in a single night, taking home Best Reggae Album for Welcome to Jamrock and Best Urban/Alternative Performance for the title track, a category no other reggae artist has won before or since. It was, by any measure, a landmark moment for reggae music's presence on a global stage historically dominated by pop, hip-hop, and R&B. The years that followed saw Damian expanding his collaborative footprint far outside of reggae's usual boundaries. In 2008, he appeared on Mariah Carey's album on the track Cruise Control. Around the same time, word began to spread that he was working on a full collaborative project with the rapper Nas, an artist whose lyrical density and social consciousness made him an unusually natural fit for Damian's own style. That project became Distant Relatives, released in May 2010. The title captured something deeper than a simple collaboration between 2 respected artists. It pointed to shared African ancestry underlying both reggae and hip-hop, 2 genres that had grown up in Ocean Park but shared common roots. Much of the album was produced by Damian alongside Damian Marley, and proceeds from the project were directed toward funding school construction in the Congo, tying the album's message about African heritage directly to a tangible act of investment in the continent. Commercially, Distant Relatives performed well beyond what many expected from a reggae hip-hop crossover project. It debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 in the U.S., moving about 57,000 copies in its first week. Damian's second top 10 album in America and Nas's 10th career top 10 album. It also topped Billboard's R&B/hip-hop, rap, and reggae albums chart simultaneously, and found chart success internationally, including entries on the charts in the UK, Canada, Germany, and across Europe. If Distant Relatives showed Damian's range within socially conscious music, his next major project showed just how far his musical curiosity could stretch. In 2011, it was revealed that Damian had joined a genre-defying supergroup called Super Heavy, alongside Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones, musician and producer Dave Stewart, Indian composer A.R. Rahman, and British singer Joss Stone. The idea reportedly originated with Stewart, who had spent time in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, and became fascinated with the idea of blending Caribbean sound with Indian orchestral influences. The band assembled at a studio in Los Angeles, recording roughly 35 hours of material, and unveiled the results with showcase performance at Jim Henson Studios. Their lead single, Miracle Worker, featured Damian alongside Jagger and Stone, while a later single, Satyamiva Jayada, saw Rahman composing around an Indian musical sensibility, with Jagger singing in Sanskrit. It was an unusual chapter in Damian's career, proof that his ear for rhythm and collaboration wasn't confined to reggae, hip-hop, or even any single continent's musical tradition. The following year, in 2012, Damian teamed up with EDM producer Skrillex for Make It Bun Dem, a track that found its way into the video game Far Cry 3 and introduced Damian's sound to yet another audience entirely unfamiliar with reggae's traditional fan base. In July 2017, Damian released his 4th studio album, Stony Hill, named after the Kingston neighborhood where he was raised. Its lead single, Nail Pond Cross, had arrived a year before. The album went on to win the Grammy for Best Reggae Album at the 60th Annual Grammy Awards, Damian's 3rd Grammy win overall, further cementing his status as arguably the most decorated reggae artist of his generation. Throughout his career, Damian has resisted drawing a hard line between reggae and dancehall, describing both as simply part of the same Jamaican cultural fabric rather than genres that need to be kept separate. That refusal to be boxed in musically, geographically, or by his father's legacy has arguably been the defining trait of his entire career. Bob Marley's influence on global music is difficult to overstate. Over roughly 36 years of life, before his death from cancer, he released 13 studio albums, one of which came out posthumously, and fathered 11 children, 9 of them biological. 7 of his children went on to pursue music careers themselves, including 5 sons, Ziggy, Stephen, Damian, Kymani, and Julian, who have each carved distinct paths while remaining connected to their shared inheritance. Ziggy Marley, the eldest, first rose to prominence fronting Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers alongside siblings Sharon and Cedella in the 1980s, achieving considerable success in his own right. But it's worth noting that of all of Bob Marley's musical children, it's Damian who has achieved some of the most significant crossover success in the American market specifically. Bob Marley and the Wailers, for all their global influence, never landed a top 10 hit on the U.S. charts the way Damian's Welcome to Jamrock did, and never had a platinum single like Damian's Make It Bun Democratic. There's something almost poetic in that. The son who barely knew his father ended up achieving commercially something his father never quite did in America during his own lifetime. Despite each carving out an individual identity, the Marley brothers have periodically reunited to honor their father's legacy collectively, most visibly through touring together. In 2025, ahead of what would have been Bob Marley's 80th birthday, the 5 musical Marley brothers, Ziggy, Stephen, Damian, Kymani, and Julian, came together for the Legacy Tour, their first joint performances in roughly 2 decades. Between them, the 5 brothers have collected 22 Grammy Awards over the course of their careers, a staggering total for a single family. Their shows were structured around passing vocal duties back and forth across their father's most iconic catalog. Songs like Get Up, Stand Up, Iron Lion Zion, Exodus, and One Love, while also carving out space for each brother to perform his own original material, whether that was Julian's Boom. There are children of legends who spend their whole lives living in a shadow, and then there are children of legends who somehow step out of that shadow and cast one of their own. Damian Marley belongs to the second category. He is the youngest son of Bob Marley, the most recognizable reggae artist who ever lived, and yet Damian didn't simply inherit a famous surname. He built an entirely distinct musical identity out of it, one that blends roots reggae with dancehall grit and hip-hop swagger. This is the story of how a boy who barely knew his father grew into one of the most decorated and respected artists in the history of Jamaican music. Damian Robert Nesta Marley was born on July 21st, 1978, in Kingston, Jamaica. His father was Bob Marley. His mother was Cindy Breakspear, a Jamaican model who, in 1976, became the first Jamaican woman to win the Miss World pageant. Bob Marley and Cindy Breakspear's relationship inspired one of the most beloved songs in the Wailers' catalog, Is This Love, a fact that has followed Damian throughout his career like a quiet, ever-present footnote to his own story. Bob Marley died of cancer in 1981, when Damian was not yet 3 years old. That means Damian never really knew his father as a living, breathing presence. Everything he came to understand about Bob Marley the man came secondhand, through family, through old recordings, through mythology that had already begun forming around his father's name before Damian was old enough to understand what any of it meant. He was raised primarily by his mother in Stony Hill, a comfortable, leafy community above Kingston, a far cry from the trenched-down tenement yards his father had grown up in and sung about. Cindy Breakspear eventually married Tom Tavares Finson, a prominent Jamaican criminal defense attorney and politician, and the household Damian grew up in included a stepfather and half-siblings who were white Jamaicans. Damian has spoken candidly in interviews about being the only person of visibly African descent in his own home, an irony not lost on him given that his father's music and philosophy were rooted in Rastafarian teachings and the Pan-Africanist vision of Marcus Garvey, a vision that often cast the establishment, the lawyers, the politicians, the Babylon system, as the very thing his stepfather represented professionally. That contradiction didn't break him. If anything, it seems to have sharpened his sense of identity. Damian has described his upbringing as a genuinely